I'm here today with Manny Flowers to conduct an interview. It's August 1st, 2006 at about 6:40 p.m. at his residence on Go Down Road. Could you state your name, please?
Hi, Manny Flowers.
And what is your ethnic or racial background?
White, Caucasian.
All right. And did you grow up in Columbus?
For the most part, yes. I was born in Orlando, Florida, and when I was about four or six, moved to Columbus. My parents were both from Ohio. They had gone to Florida. Their story was they'd gone to Florida for a vacation, a honeymoon, and stayed 7 years. In the process, I came along, and when it was time for me to go to school, or approaching that time, we moved back north to Columbus, where my mother's relatives were.
And where was it that you first lived in Columbus?
Over on the east side, an area I've looked and I guess it's just simply referred to as East Columbus. It's the area between 5th Avenue and Cassidy out to about 5th Avenue and Rarick Avenue.
All right. And do you have any siblings?
Funny question. When I was 33, I found out that my parents were actually my aunt and uncle. And I was raised as an only child, but when I was 33, I found out that these cousins I had, who were about 5 or 6 of them, were actually half brothers and sisters.
All right, so you had other siblings, but not that you grew up with.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask this first. What year were you born?
1963, exactly 1 month before the Kennedy assassination, which is my alibi.
And what is your earliest memory?
Earliest memory. Honestly, I seem to remember that I was laying in that presentation area where they have babies when they show them to the parents. I honestly think I remember that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Any other early memories?
I can just remember that as a much smaller child, I had reddish hair, and I think I was one of those people who got called Opie on occasion, but nothing specific comes to mind.
Where did you go to school at here in Columbus?
I attended elementary school at East Columbus Elementary, which had been the school my mother had gone to. Then I went to Eastmore Junior High, which is now a middle school. And at the end of 9th grade, we moved to Utica, Ohio, which is about 40 miles northeast of here. And I finished high school at Utica High School.
And after you completed, during the time that you were in elementary and high school, were there any people that you considered your heroes?
Yeah, actually there were. When I was about 8 years old, I heard an announcement over the PA about it being kind of a last call to join the Cub Scouts. And so I joined the Cub Scouts, and through that had exposure to a lot of really wonderful people. Some of the camp counselors at the summer camp they let us go to, we went for the day, and we would interact with the young adult camp staff, and I remember looking up to those guys a lot. Also, of course, my father kind of ranks as a definite hero as well as a character.
How old were you when you first realized that you might be different than some of the other kids?
Yeah, I would say honestly, for me, it's probably around 8 or 9, because that's about the time I remember really forming friendships with kids my age and playing with kids in the neighborhood. And there were always certain kids that I looked to that were a little bit older, and I always looked to them as kind of protectors, I guess. People that would keep me out of trouble.
And what was it about that what were the feelings that you had that made you realize that you might be different?
You know, I definitely remember that it was, there was an anticipation of spending time with these people. I can think of one guy in particular, his name was Mike, and Mike was about a year older than me, so he would have been about 9. And there were other kids in the neighborhood who were my age that would want to wrestle around or want to fight, and Mike was really good at saying, well, I don't think he wants to do that, or keeping them away, or just being somebody to talk to. It wasn't all physical or combative. He was just somebody that I liked being around, and it was mutual.
And when was it that you first realized you might have romantic feelings towards men?
That's a good question, too. There was something in your prior question I don't think I quite got to, and I'm trying to remember what it is. The anticipation was part of it, wanting to spend time as a young kid with other kids, other boys, and also there was a sense of calm, and there was also a sense of, I don't think, there was an awareness in me that I don't think everybody else feels like this. Now to your last question, what was it?
When did you figure out that some of these different feelings might be romantic?
Okay. Well, for me, it honestly culminated in 1985. I can pin it down. In 1985, I was 21 years old and was working at a Boy Scout summer camp. I had, over the period of about 3 years, developed feelings for a fellow staff member. And that particular summer, that kind of came out. I kind of came out, I guess.
Tell me about that.
Oh, it was pretty awful. He was several years younger than I was. At the time, he was 16. I was 21. And at that time, we really had little training in scouting that dealt with same-sex attractions or anything like that. And so all I knew was what it was I was what I was feeling was inappropriate. But it also seemed like it was kind of the next logical step. We had gotten to be friends. We would do things when we weren't at camp. When it was our night off at summer camp, we always did things together, and we brought along our own little group of friends. And one of the most peaceful moments I've ever known, and even to this day, was there was one afternoon, in the afternoons after lunch, in the afternoons from about 1:30 to 2 o'clock. It's kind of a downtime. So the kids who are at camp are back in their campsites. Lunch is over, and the staff members just kind of have time to relax a little bit. And he and I, as always, spent a great deal of time together. And one afternoon, I just remember talking to him in his tent, and without really thinking about it, just kind of leaned back and laid my head in his lap. And it just felt wonderfully correct. It just felt right. There was no real preparation or I think I'm going to do that kind of thought to it. It just was very naturally occurring, and it was not rebuffed. It was just a very pleasant moment in my day, in my life. And shortly thereafter, within a week or so, things started to change.
How did things change?
We In those days, the camp I worked at employed a staff for a full summer, and we would work at one physical camp for 6 weeks, and then we would relocate and work at another camp for, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it was. And that particular summer, there was there were a lack of people coming in, so we figured we could send down an advance team to start getting things together for the second camp. And it turned out that he and I were picked for that, and we had just a day and a half of just the two of us in this grand camp setting, just working, trying to get things prepared, like cleaning camp stoves, cleaning dinner sets so that when the campers came in, they would look halfway decent and wouldn't have mice running around in them. We spent that time just being together. And I still remember the night that the truck pulled in, bringing everybody else to us. As the truck lights came up over the hill, I just felt my heart sink, because there was almost this, now I can call it idyllic time of a day and a half where we were just together, we were working, we were dining, we were in all things together, and that was coming to an end. Within a week or so, this person who had always been really close to me and vice versa, just was, as a natural course of things, was just starting to do different things with other people. And I just got very jealous of that. I started just really kind of going through a meltdown. A specific example, there was one night where I was preparing some of the dinners for the campers, and that involved putting milk cartons per camper in a separate little food crate. And I dropped one of those, and it made a big splat all over the floor, a half-pint container. It's made a big splat. And instead of picking it up and cleaning it, I just continued to drop milk cartons. And each time I dropped one, I stomped on it. Milk went flying everywhere. And that was probably 36, 40 of those. And I felt like I'd really kind of lost it. And instead of cleaning it up, I just went to my tent and decided it was time to quit, time to leave there. I tried to turn in my resignation, and my boss, who was also a very good friend of mine at the time, was wanting to know what was going on, and I kept putting him off, and I talked to the camp chaplain, and finally I got honest with him, and he was really, I think, very, for a Boy Scout camp chaplain, I think he was pretty liberal in what he was saying, which was, you have a lot of things to deal with here, but you need to let some people know what's going on. And so that was kind of my flashpoint. And I told my boss, and he said, well, I don't think it's a good idea for you to leave. I think you need to talk to your friend, the guy I've been talking about. You need to talk to, and this is an alias, you need to talk to Jim and let Jim know what's going on, because he doesn't understand. And so that night, 9:30 at night, in an empty campsite, I sat Jim down, or he stood there, and I sat down at a picnic table, and I said, that I had these feelings for him, and his response was, well, I'm not worried, because part of what was going on was I was scared that I was a pedophile. He was 16. To me, that meant, well, I'm attracted to somebody younger. I must be a pederast, a pedophile, whatever. And that was all tied up into it as well. And I told him that I essentially was afraid where I was going next. And Jim's response was, well, I'm not afraid, because first of all, I know if I asked you to stop, you would. And if you didn't stop, I know that a right hook carries some weight, or something to that effect. So we kind of smoothed over it, got through the rest of the summer. That was that was like a week or two after Rock Hudson had come out with AIDS and come out as gay, and not very long before he died. So, I mean, it's like all of a sudden my life was matching these iconic events that it never really had before.
Was this Jim person, did you find his reaction to be supportive?
It was, I think it was as supportive as it could be, given that he was a 16-year-old who was no more informed about things than I was. Through the years, I kicked that little meeting over and over in my head. Was he saying, I know you won't do anything I don't want you to do? Was that an invitation? Or was that strictly a way of saying, I can take care of myself. Whatever you do, if it's wrong, you'll know about it. That event fed into my next year at school tremendously. I was in my third year of college, and I was a person who started out not really knowing what I wanted to do. Still didn't, but by this time, based on my success working at a scout camp, I decided, well, I should go into education, and secondary education. And of course, my way of thinking at the time threw all that into jeopardy. I felt really alone, alienated. I felt like, well, if I'm a pedophile, I pretty much don't have a future. That's what this is about. I didn't understand that one could be gay, that being gay and being a pedophile were two separate things. I didn't even have that concept. And I found out about the counseling center at Ohio State. I was in a social organization at the time that met in the Ohio Union on the third floor. We had an office back where they used to have offices. And right above that was the Ohio State Counseling Center, drop-in counseling. And even going up there was kind of a trauma for me. Not trauma, but it was terrifying. And of course, when I went up there, one of the times I went up there, I recognized one of the secretaries there was a student who worked in the same office that our social group was in. And of course I thought, well, that's it. There goes, the red letter's going to be up in no time. And it wasn't that way at all. I met with the counselors there, a couple of them, and joined a group while I was there, a gay men's group, and attended a few meetings. And I just felt, I think what it was that everybody else in the group were further down the road than I was. So the group didn't feel particularly comfortable for me. So I kind of dropped out of that. One thing I wanted to tell you, kind of as a side note, when I was in high school, I was in the little town of Utica, Ohio. Utica is very much a rural school district, and I was in high school theater then. One of my classmates was actually a couple years younger than I, was this really pleasant, short kid who, even in ninth grade, professed his undying devotion to Dolly Parton. And I didn't think that was horrific. I just thought it was a little bizarre, because every day it was Dolly this, Dolly that, Dolly. Well, years later I found out that he was a drag performer, and he became one of Columbus's most celebrated drag performers, Brazon. It just kind of was interesting to me, because I knew him way back when, and even then, he had that drive. And I was talking to a friend about it today online, and he said, yeah, my mom kind of freaked out once when Gary, that was his name, when Gary asked her if he could watch her apply her makeup. So I think that particular fact was I think kind of the origin of my whole reason in wanting to do an interview, just to verify and say, yeah, Gary really, he was attracted to that way back when.
During this time period in high school, did you realize that Gary was gay?
No, no, I really didn't.
Did other students
I don't
realize?
know, and I don't know if he was, to what level he was out. You know, there were guys that, and again, I'm confessing my own naivete here, but to my way of thinking, nobody really did anything after school was out of any kind of sexual nature. I heard that guys went out with girls, but the idea that they were actually doing anything, it just never clicked with me for some reason. And the same with, there were certain guys who got tagged with slur names, fags, whatever. And I thought, well, that's not a name you want to have, but I also never thought it really meant anything. I didn't connect it. Thinking back, I know that Gary had some friends who were very supportive. They seemed to be a tight little clique, and I think at one point I could have probably been part of that clique, but 10th grade, I was just trying to make friends anywhere and didn't want to get pigeonholed.
You said, you talked before about going and talking with the Boy Scout chaplain and
Yes,
telling him what your situation was.
yes.
Was he the first person that you ever expressed attraction to another man to?
Yeah, I believe he was. I believe he was the very first, not counting my journal, which by that point I had started writing, and a lot of it was, it was almost like writing your own porn. I started, this would be nice, I'm going to do this and this and this. And in fact, later on, one of the many stupid things I did was to show Jim how much I really cared. I gave him my journal to read, and I think that probably creeped him out more than anything.
When did you start keeping a journal?
I started keeping journal, I think, probably when I was around 14 or 15, and I kept journals off and on, but mostly up until about 32. My journals weren't necessarily coherent to anybody else but me at times, but unfortunately, I don't know where my journals are. I've lost them. It's kind of upsetting because I'd like to think I'm a writer and a poet at times, and I know there were at least ideas in there, and those have been kind of misplaced or lost. Or
would have the second time you acknowledged your sexuality been when you went to the counseling center?
Yes.
Were there any other people in between, other gay people you met or other gay supportive people you met at college or friends or whatever?
No, not really. That fall, in the fall of '85, I had 2 roommates, and I kept myself very isolated from them. There was about a 3-month period there where I was just wound up very tight, just very, very secretive, very quiet, in a continuous bad mood. Went to see the counselor. In the meantime, I was working a work-study job at Ohio State and met a girl and started dating her. And, I know I'm not the first person to ever do that. And we went out a few times. Nice girl, wonderful person, but I think for me it was more about, is this sexually where I want to be? We had a wonderful time, and sexually it was a pretty fulfilling experience, but it didn't seem like a complete loving relationship. And at least at the time, that was my reason for jettisoning that relationship. I said, I kind of promised myself that I never want to be a person that rejects anyone. But here I found myself in a situation where I had to reject someone because it wasn't going to benefit either one of us. And as a matter of fact, it turned out to be a very good thing. Within about 2 years, she was engaged to one of my service fraternity brothers, so it worked out for the best for her. Counselors at Ohio State eventually referred me to a place that used to be down on Indianola. It was the Open Door Clinic. And I went there and met up with a counselor who I think I saw her for about the next 7 years, actually. I followed her to 2 or 3 different agencies. That was a very helpful relationship. One of the things that she did was encourage me to go to a group for, I'm talking in circles, I'm getting mixed up a little bit. After I dated the first girl, I immediately started dating another girl. The second girl and I developed a real serious relationship, and before we actually started the date, I told her that I think I'm gay. And she said, well, that's too bad. I was kind of hoping you wanted to go out. And almost like in a sitcom, I said, okay. So we started going out. And we dated for a couple years. And it was very intense. It remains probably the most intensive long-term sexual relationship I've ever had. It ended, I guess, as well as any of those end, as any relationship ends. But in the interim, the second counselor I saw recommended that I go to a group for people that were gay people who had straight spouses or straight partners. And that was a group comprised mostly of older men. And at the time, I went to several meetings. It just seemed like that wasn't a good way to go for me either. This girl and I talked about open marriage, and which at the time was something I was all for. I thought, well, this is great. I can have my cake and my other cake and eat it all and not feel guilty. But then she kind of pointed out that she'd be seeing other people as well, and I couldn't handle that. And so I realized, well, that's not a good idea. That's not really going to benefit us. In the course of that relationship, we had to have an abortion. We talked marriage, and it almost came to that, and probably within before it got to serious planning, that relationship ended. And the strange thing was, the whole time I kept thinking, well, I told her I'm gay, so at least I've been up front. And I felt good about being honest, but I also thought, well, how's this going to work, really? And it never seemed to make sense, but at the time it had, I don't know, its own kind of logic, I guess.
During the time that you were involved with her, were you also having encounters with other men?
No. I think the closest I ever got was looking at other men, maybe buying some porn. That was about it. Back up a little bit again, and I feel like it sounds like I'm making this stuff up because I'm not thinking of it in order. But you asked a question a little while ago between the chaplain and the counselor at Ohio State, had I talked to anybody else. And in fact, I think the next person I reached out to was somebody on the suicide hotline. And I think that was probably the third or fourth person. And it was on a Saturday night. I sat at home getting really, really drunk and was in the throes of the blues and called the suicide hotline, happened to get someone who was gay. And I think of this gentleman as my guardian angel because he talked to me, and at that time I think I seriously was trying to find a way out. And he kind of talked me down from that. Basically talked to me, I guess, till I fell asleep or passed out or whatever. The next Monday, I got a call from him. During the course of our conversation on Saturday night, I had given him information that it turns out that we kind of had not crossed paths, but we knew some of the same people. And from those same people, he was able to get my number. And there was a little part of me that thought, okay, this is kind of creepy. But we talked, we met, was a wonderful guy who told me that he was with his partner and had been with his partner for a couple years. He was a young man too. I was 21. He was maybe 25. And he also told me that, he had a brother who participated gleefully in fag bashing, would go to gay bars and wait on people to come out and hit them upside the head or whatever. So for him, there was no real way to come out to his family. But he also said, he kind of gave me an example that even in trying times, you can still make progress. The other thing about him was a couple weeks later, my old friend Jim came over for a visit. He was actually there to visit one of my roommates. There was a group of guys there. I got drunk again, started acting the fool, to put it mildly. Started making real high drama kind of gestures. My friends got concerned. They called the suicide hotline, and they got the same guy again. And because he could understand, I guess he knew enough to figure out that it was me they were talking about, and kind of was able to calm them down. And, the first time he definitely saved my life. The second time, I think he just did me a tremendous favor. And I've never really seen him since then to thank him, but there was a moment where things could have ended, and they didn't. So that's my guardian angel.
What did it feel like being gay but not exploring that part of your life?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's very, in a lot of ways, for me, it was, I guess I would say that I'm a person who's probably on the tortoise track to coming out, in that it's been a very slow journey for me. In the late 80s, I went to the bars, all the time having this kind of fear of, if I even look at somebody funny, I'm going to get AIDS. And all the AIDS' death, all the literature that was going around, it's like, and, I own up to it fully, but I think I took a lot of the worst possible messages out of a lot of that, where they said, well, let's see, there's safe sex, there's safer sex, there's no sex. Okay, no sex seems to be the safest way to go. And so as a result, my definition of gay is maybe it's not the most active voice of being gay. I've been to a couple of the parades. I've never had honestly, I've never had the courage to get in line. I've known people who were openly identified as gay and wouldn't necessarily come out even to them. It's just been, a very slow route for me. I think it's funny that one of the bars that used to be downtown was Herbie's, and Herbie's, it was much more of a, first of all, I've never been real comfortable in bars, gay or straight. My dad was a bartender when I was a kid, and as a kid they were a fun place because, the older guys would give you a nickel or a quarter or whatever, and you could be there, you could play with the games and be entertained. But as an adult, as a young adult, I never particularly felt comfortable in any bar. When I first started coming out, the message I seemed to take over and over was the only real place to meet gay people is if you're an activist or if you go to the bars or if you like softball or whatever. And it seemed like the avenues that were there just weren't ones that I took advantage of. But the thing I was going to say about Herbie's is it always struck me as odd that Herbie's was in the shadow of the Ohio Pen, a men's prison. And of course now it's all been torn down for the Blue Jackets hockey arena, but I always thought that irony was interesting.
What bar was the first one that you ever went to?
The first bar I ever went to was the Garage.
And how did you end up there?
I think one of the counselors I talked to at Ohio State actually said the way I approached it was I think I might be gay, and he said, well, if you think you're gay, you need to go to the bars, you need to, maybe pick up some pornography or whatever, and you need to investigate this. And so it was almost like an assignment, I think, the first time I went. The girl that I almost married went with me or took me, and I don't know if she took me the first time I went there, but I went with her one time, and I did that classic terrified, I'll sit in the corner that's facing the wall so I don't have to look at people unless I lean over and glance at them kind of thing. She had a great time, of course. It was just terrifying for me. But another night that we went there, I ran into another one of my fraternity brothers, who's now still in Columbus, and I believe I see an ad for him in some of the local publications. He's an accountant, I think. And in fact, after I ran into him there, I went and talked with him and said, I think I'm gay, da-da-da-da-da. And he said, well, I am, and I've got a partner. And it's like everybody else that I know or knew seemed to be more well-adjusted when it came to accepting gayness as part of their life.
What was that evening like, other than feeling a little bit timid?
Oh, well, like I said, it was kind of terrifying because on one hand I was afraid,
What did you expect?
Good question.
Before you got there?
Good question. Boy, I don't know. I guess I figured it would all be, I don't know. I think that's part of it. I didn't know what to expect. If I were going to try and reconstruct that now, I'd say I probably anticipated that it was going to be guys rolling around right in the middle of the floor, making out on the bar, the most graphic, the most in-your-face images you can think of right when you get through the door.
How did you know where it was at?
That information I think I got from one of the counselors or there were a few free papers that floated around back then. I think Gay Beat. And I think they may have had an ad in that. Somewhere I picked up a Gay Beat and surreptitiously got it home somehow and found the information there. I went past the gay bars, the Garage, many, many times before I ever actually made it through the door. I was driving down Long Street. Of course, once was to find it, but there were many, many times where I just thought, I can't go in there.
The first time that you were there, did you speak with anyone?
The very first time I went there, I don't think I did.
Did you know that, what time of the evening did you go?
Oh, it was probably 8:30 to about 9:30 or so. So it was fairly busy, but it wasn't crazy packed.
What was your impression that first time?
Well, it was certainly very smoky, very loud, dark. The dark was almost unnerving because it was darker than any other bar I'd ever been to. And when it's too dark too long, you start assuming there are things in the shadows. And then the fact that the bathroom was way the hell and gone the other side of the dance floor. First of all, the idea of going to the bathroom in this strange new environment was frightening. And then realizing, well, in order to go to the bathroom, everybody in the entire place is going to know where you're going. It was head trip after head trip. Just looking for things to be terrified of, I guess.
Were there any other bars that you checked out in those earlier days?
Yeah. Let's see. I think I went to the Eagle once in the late 80s, early 90s, once or twice. By that time, I'd gone to some of the gala meetings, which is what the group at Ohio State was called then.
That's the gay students group?
Yes, yeah. I went to a gala meeting, and the very first gala meeting I went to, I got to it early. And in the course of getting to it early, I was hanging out with about 3 or 4 students, gay students, who were being as snarky with each other as you could possibly imagine. They were friends, they were intimates, and they were just being as vulgar and as crude as any group of people are. That, you know, when you're 19 or 20 and you're in a group, it can get like that. But being that I wasn't part of that group and being exposed to all of it, I felt like a complete alien. And after that meeting, I didn't go back till about a year later. And I thought, well, I'll give it another try. And in walked a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a couple years and didn't know was gay, but it was a girl from the same social service organization who had been like my pledge little brother. We talked afterwards and kind of went around together a few places. She had at that time a roommate who had HIV, and that was the first person I think I ever met with HIV. One of the places we went to was the Eagle. I think she also dragged me over to the Wall Street once or twice. You know, they were everywhere you looked in the bars. There were ads or there were notices or advisements about play safe. You know, they'd have a big bowl of condoms sitting right as you'd go through the door. So I mean, I think the gay community was doing its best, and for me it was a matter of interpreting it in the worst possible sense.
Do you remember how you first learned about the existence of AIDS?
Again, I go back to like 1985. I think it had been vaguely in the air on the news and in the papers a few times. I hadn't really paid attention to it. Late July or early August of that year, that's when all the stuff with Rock Hudson started becoming public. And all of a sudden I started paying attention to it. So for me it was kind of like thinking I'm gay, thinking, well, okay, I'll probably get AIDS, and I'm probably a pedophile. All three at once. It was kind of overwhelming. I mean, that's understated now, but whew, at the time it was pretty frightening. And that is about, honestly, the time I started hearing about AIDS with any kind of empathy, I guess. During
those early years, did you know people who were afflicted or lose friends?
The one gentleman I mentioned, I knew him just vaguely, and there was a few years later, I ran into somebody from the same rural high school that I'd met Gary at, who had since come out and had since contracted HIV. And I saw him at a display table at a shopping mall probably, I think, a month or so before he passed, before he died. And I honestly didn't recognize him initially because he was, you know, at that time he was maybe 30 years old, but was so vastly changed from how I remembered him from 18, in the sense that he lost a tremendous amount of weight. And I didn't recognize him when I first saw him, but as soon as we started talking, he recognized me, and he just had this, he was doing work promoting AIDS awareness, and he just seemed to have kind of this angelic sense of acceptance. I think he knew that he didn't have much longer. Yeah, it was amazing, because he just a beautiful expression, and he just seemed genuinely pleased to see me. He didn't know that I was all the stuff I was struggling with or dealing with or whatever, but it was a nice reunion.
Were there other groups besides the gala group that you were involved with at OSU?
Yeah, the fraternity I've mentioned that are kind of beating around the bush, it was Alpha Phi Omega, and it was a co-ed service fraternity. And it was organized around the principles of scouting. And it originally, in its early history, it had originally been a fraternity for Eagle Scouts. And at Ohio State I was there in the mid 80s. At the time I was there, Ohio State had been one of the earlier chapters to go co-ed. And so we were very much a full functioning service group like the Kiwanis or Circle K, except that we kind of kept the nomenclature of a fraternity. So we had sisters who were brothers.
And what sorts of things did you do
Um,
that group?
our goal was service and, of course, friendship. And one of the projects we did for a few years was we would rent the Ohio Union, one of the ballrooms, and have like I think a 100-yard or 100-foot banana split. We'd take, brand new rain gutters and line them with ice cream. And it was kind of an all-you-can-eat ice cream. We also used to, if you lived in the dorms anywhere from probably the 60s through the 80s, you encountered what was called a mini cool, which was a little hideous brown refrigerator. And for many years, our fraternity had had the lease to distribute those. And so at the beginning of fall quarter, we would work day and night for about 3 days, handing out these hideous little refrigerators all over campus. And then we'd collect them in the spring and clean them. That was probably the thing that we were most associated with.
Were there any other groups or organizations at Ohio State?
Oh, can't think now. As an undergrad, no.
Did you complete your degree at Ohio State?
Yeah, I was on the decade plan. After about 7 years, I finally graduated with a degree in education and spent about a year and a half living back home and kind of realized I don't think I want to teach. At that time, I was about 26, still heavily conflicted, still not sure if where this attraction to younger people fit in. So I thought, well, it's probably best if I don't go into education right now. And I picked up a retail job for the summer and worked that, and I'm still doing that now. Left it for about a year and a half, did something else, but came back to it. So I've been in retail for about 12 years now.
During the time from the 80s up until now,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the earlier times, how was it that the gay people met each other or
Mm-hmm.
connected? What were the methods that people used that you were aware of, or that you used yourself?
Yeah. Well, of course, there were the anonymous hookups in bookstores. At one point, I thought that was one I might be interested in, meeting somebody in, and not like Long's bookstore, but like a Lion's Den or some other store that sold adult material. The other kinds of there were the anonymous hookups like the parks, bars, and none of those. I guess I figured out that none of those were really what I wanted to get involved with. For me, I figured I was probably better off if I was going to meet somebody, to meet them either accidentally or in a social setting. Newman Center on campus also had a gay men's group, and I went to that a few times. And that was probably the first place I saw gay porn. Just kind of odd, but they were using it for demonstration purposes in the context of talking about safer sex. Myself, one of the few things I tried as far as meeting people was one of the gay papers had personal ads, and before the major boom in the internet, I had a pen pal. It was from Akron or somewhere north in the state, and we wrote 2 or 3 times, and then we met, and nothing really became of it, but it was really nice to have something to look forward to. Letters from somebody who seemed like somebody I really liked. I had a tremendous sense of paranoia because I was back living at home in Utica with my parents. I was working in Columbus, but I felt the need, even, this is the early 90s, I even felt the need that if I was going to get mail, I should have a P.O. box and I should have it in another city. So I had a P.O. box in Granville. It was absurd. It was about 20 miles out of the way no matter where you were going.
Were there, you mentioned before a publication called Gay Beat?
Yes.
What kind of a publication was that?
That, if I remember right, that almost had, I think it was a weekly or bi-weekly, and I think it was about 8 pages, and it looked more like a swollen, it looked more like a swollen announcement program that you would find in church than anything. I think it had 2 staples down the seam. It was the kind of thing it looked like it was put together at Kinko's, just Xerox and a colored cover. Might be getting it mixed up with another one, but I think that's how I first saw Gay Beat. Then it took on more of a newspaper form on newsprint, a couple different colors. Heartland, I think, was the newspaper that I used, or that I was reading when I met my pen pal.
Where did a person get a copy of Gay Beat or Heartland or whatever?
They were usually pretty available in the bars, in the counseling centers that I went to. You could pick them up there. There weren't too many other places than that I can think of. Stonewall, of course. You could go to Stonewall Union and pick them up.
Did you ever take advantage of any of the services provided by Stonewall?
Yes and no. Again, I went there a few times, but for me, and again, it's how you interpret these things, but for me, it's like in those days where they were located on 5th Avenue just before you got to High Street, and there was no real easy parking there. And for me, it was a matter of, well, if I can't get in and out in a hurry, I don't know that I want to go there. I don't know if I want to be seen there. They've got a wonderful location now, of course, on High Street, but then it was just a matter for me of ease of egress, I guess.
Sure. You mentioned before attending a couple of pride parades.
Yeah.
Tell me about the first time that you did that.
Wow. I think the first pride parade I went to was probably around 89 or 90. And I think I went down and saw like just a small portion of the parade. I think I'd gone to ComFest that day and had kind of used going to ComFest as a cover to go to the parade. Another one I went right down to the front of the line and saw them lining up for the step-off where they start the parade. And
this was at Goodale Park?
Yes, yeah, and this was maybe 5-6 years ago, I'm not sure when. But it was a really bright day. Everywhere you looked, anybody that was pale was beet red. And there were the ladies on the motorcycles. There were a few protesters with signs. They weren't really yelling or anything. It was almost like they were waiting for the official start of the parade themselves before they committed to it, which I thought was kind of strange. It's like well, we're not going to yell till you start walking, even though we see your line. That one I went to, and I just was amazed by the mass of people. The line seemed to stretch back into the park quite a way. And I watched as they stepped off and watched some of that for a few minutes. I think that was the very first year where they had kind of a party at the other end of the parade. And I went to that and walked around. And it was a hideously hot day, but it was pretty amazing to look around and think, oh, this is a whole park full of gay people, openly gay people, you know. And I don't know, it seemed pretty amazing to me.
Having lived in Columbus for a lot of years, do you remember ever reading things in the paper about local gay-related things, or seeing things on TV about gay people, whether they be positive or negative?
It's kind of funny because I think a lot of that, before I started struggling with the questions of my own identity, I think I just kind of naturally tuned out or interpreted it as some sort of a negative. When Stonewall Union organized, I remember hearing about that in relation to Jerry Falwell coming to town. I didn't really know who Jerry Falwell was, but I'd heard of the Moral Majority, and I'd heard that they were kind of, even as a pretty uninvolved pedestrian person, I had a sense that the Moral Majority was someone who was trying to dictate standards that even folks in Columbus weren't necessarily inclined to latch on to. In other words, there was a lot of resentment against them coming to town, and I don't think it was just strictly gay people. And so I guess I remember hearing about Stonewall in relation to that. And then, of course, years later, when it seemed like I could take advantage of their services, I heard, well, they're alive and growing, and they're still here, and da-da-da-da-da.
Anything else come to mind?
About
gay issues, local gay people, controversies?
The aforementioned Brazon, I remember how his death was such a tragedy and done in such a horrific manner. He was stabbed. The thing is, I never actually saw one of his shows. I never actually got to tell him how impressed I'd been that he had taken this passion of his, this passion for performance, and had not only made it a viable thing that he could do and share with people, but something that through his work he was able to bring in lots of money for charities, for AIDS, for gay-related issues. And I was, and I think I still am, very in awe of that, because when I knew him as a kid, again, ninth grade, I thought he was just kind of really obsessed with Dolly Parton, and I didn't see what was going to become of it. Sometime in the mid-90s, he decided that he wanted to, the small town of Utica has yearly, they have a fall homecoming, which is an event, it's a street fair essentially. And he decided that he wanted to bring his cabaret act to do a presentation in his hometown. And his mother was on the group that helped organize it and had, I think, kind of surreptitiously got his name entered as one of the performance acts, which is usually, bluegrass, maybe some country singers, maybe a little, middle-aged rock and roll. Somehow one of the city fathers found out about it and basically were able to squelch it. And I think as a way of defending himself, because he wasn't able to perform there, he wrote a letter to the local paper's editor saying that, this is no attempt to change to challenge the mores of the town or anything. It's just that I wanted to bring my friends back to my hometown and show my hometown what I can do. And it was very simple, very clear, and I thought, okay. I mean, I like to think had I been one of the people involved in the voting on that, he would have been able to do it. And I think it was a kind of a missed opportunity. When I was going around with the second girl who had a big impact on me, one of the things she wanted to do was go to gala meetings with me. So we went to a couple gala meetings. One of them, they were showing a film. It was in the Ohio Union, I think the third floor, and we heard some noise going on out in the Ohio Union, and we kind of went to see what was going on, and there were a group of, and I don't know the right terminology, but I guess they were just shameless drag queens. They were guys who were not trying to necessarily convince anybody that they were women. I think they were guys who were saying, hey, we're guys in dresses. And it happened to be, I think at that time, in the upstairs dining room, the Ohio State football team was having a big dinner. Maybe not a formal dinner, but they were having some sort of a dinner. And some of the footballers encountered these guys out in the stairwell and started giving them a hard time. Great lesson for me, because initially I thought it's going to be hard enough to try and be gay without those guys running around, implying the drag performers. So I asked the president of Gala at the time, who was running this evening, I talked to him afterwards. I said, how are we supposed to feel about them, essentially? And he said, well, when you're gay, it's a pretty big umbrella. And he was very pro-inclusivity. And that was a nice lesson that came along at a good time for me. Flash forward about 10 years later, I did work with the Kaleidoscope group briefly. And one of the first events I was involved in was their gay prom. And they had it in the same room where the Ohio State football team had been those years before. And I mean, that the teen prom was really a wonderful evening, and the irony was not lost on me.
In some of the prior interviews I've done, people have described having some not positive experiences with the police related to their being gay. Mm-hmm. Have you had any experiences? No. You were talking...
In fact, I met a gay policeman early on, too, which was kind of interesting. But no.
You were talking a moment ago about being inclusive?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it your experience when you first started going out to the bars that the bars were a mixture of different kinds of people, different races, different sexes, or were...
I think they were fairly inclusive in terms of, I don't think racially they were particularly diverse. I seem to remember it was very much a Wonder Bread crowd, but I do remember one of the most erotic moments I ever had on a dance floor was dancing next to someone and not knowing whether it was a man or a woman. And so the genders mixed, the people that weren't even claiming a specific gender were there.